They didn't know my name, but they knew exactly where they wanted me to stand. Behind them, beneath everyone. And the worst part was that my own sister let them. I'm Riley Ward. That night, when they mocked me to my face, calling me the help, laughing as if I were invisible. It was the same night my sister looked away, pretending she didn't hear it. That silence cut deeper than any insult. I didn't say a word. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to, because while they were busy deciding what I was worth, they had no idea whose hands their entire future was resting in. And that night, in that room full of people who believed I was nothing, I finally decided to show them exactly who I was. 10 years had passed since I last drove into New Haven Sound, yet the moment the shoreline came into view, the familiar tug of something unfinished pressed against my chest. I returned for Nora's engagement party, the event my parents had advertised to every neighbor within a 3-meter radius. They still described my work as some vague online thing, spoken with the kind of gentle pity people reserve for someone who never quite grew into who they were supposed to be. He let it slide. Some narratives are easier to leave untouched. The resort chosen for the celebration glowed with fresh renovations, and an overworked staff rushed through final checklists. No one here knew who actually controlled the company behind it, and I intended to keep that truth tucked away. This day was Nora's, not mine, but my welcome was as subtle as a slap. The moment I stepped inside the lobby, a server shoved a tray of glasses into my hands and directed me toward a banquet hall without looking up. I didn't argue. Silence sometimes reveals more than correction ever could. Then the Dempseys entered. Cool smiles. Expensive posture. The kind of family who believed rooms rearranged themselves to accommodate them. The matriarch's eyes skimmed over me from head to toe before discarding me entirely. Nora hurried over, hugged me too quickly, and whispered that I should just try to blend in because they were particular. That was all I needed to know. A passing manager muttered to a colleague about Harbor Point's final inspection before the event. I almost laughed. The person he meant was standing right here, still holding a tray I never should have been given. I walked the length of the resort's main corridor. The distant crash of waves muffled beneath the frantic movements of staff rushing to finish last-minute details. The place looked polished, elegant, effortless, yet the people holding it together were anything but calm. A man perched on a ladder muttered under his breath. Adjusting a chandelier as if it were a ticking bomb, he sighed that he just hoped they wouldn't change their demands again at the last minute. I didn't need to ask who he meant. I'd seen this type of guest too many times. People who believed money, or the illusion of it, gave them the right to treat others however they pleased, and the Dempseys carried themselves like the unofficial royalty of the East Coast. Crisp smiles masked sharp judgment. I settled briefly into a chair in the waiting lounge before a woman, one of the groom's aunts, leaned in with a soft laugh and reminded me that staff didn't sit with the guests. I rose without correcting her. Letting people underestimate me had become an art. As I stepped back into the hall, I caught a hushed exchange between the groom's mother and the event coordinator. She insisted that no news outlet could catch wind of the family's financial situation, and that all that mattered was that tonight appeared flawless. Financial situation wasn't a phrase anyone used lightly at an engagement celebration. Something was unraveling behind the scenes near the technical booth. A young worker jerked his hand away from a table, shoving a thick envelope into his pocket. When he turned, I saw the groom's mother pivot away too quickly, feigning interest in a floral arrangement. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't innocent. Then my phone buzzed. A single notification lit the screen. Dempsey Industrial Acquisition. Pending owner signature. A short message, but one that snapped every piece of this puzzle into place. Their carefully curated image. Their desperate insistence on perfection. Even the tension rippling through the staff. Everything pointed to a truth they hoped no one would discover. Their company was unraveling, and the only signature that could save it was mine. Nora intercepted me near the side hallway, Adjusting her dress with hands that wouldn't stay still, she whispered that I should avoid mentioning anything about work tonight. She needed everything to appear perfect. I asked who she was trying to impress, but she didn't answer. The silence said enough. In the chaos of floral deliveries and sound checks, a folder slipped from the groom's lawyer's briefcase. I bent to pick it up, and the title stared back at me like a slap. Financial Evaluation, the Ward Family. They weren't just marrying into us. They were assessing us. Inside the folder, beneath clip summaries and projections, was a page highlighting Nora's supposed financial potential, unverified assets, possible access through sister, with unknown professional background. Unknown. That was all I am in their calculations. In the control booth, I found something worse. An audio file queued for automatic playback later that evening. Ward Truth MP3. I clicked it. Nora's voice played through the speakers, warped and pieced together into ugly sentences that never left her mouth. Lines that painted her as manipulative, shallow, calculating, set to broadcast in the middle of her own celebration. Then I checked the camera logs. Grainy footage showed the groom's mother slipping an envelope to the technician, her lips forming words that froze me in place. We need this engagement to fall apart. If there's a scandal, Owen won't marry her. They never wanted Nora. They wanted whatever money they thought she came with. And the moment they realized she couldn't save them, they planned to destroy her. The pre-engagement party opened with soft music and polished smiles, but every expression in the room felt stretched thin, as if held together by obligation rather than joy. The Dempseys floated through the crowd with the certainty of people used to being admired. Nora shadowed them closely, her posture tense, every gesture rehearsed. I stood beside the drink table, unnoticed, listening to the unguarded comments people make when they think you don't matter. A groom's aunt brushed my arm lightly, pointing me away from the VIP section, as though redirecting a stray piece of furniture. When I explained I was with Nora, she paused only long enough to disguise her surprise before advising me to blend in so I wouldn't disrupt the aesthetic. I let it pass. They weren't trying to hide their hierarchy. They wanted everyone to see it. Nora saw the interaction but turned back to her guests, tightening her smile. It wasn't malice. It was fear. She was molding herself into whatever shape she thought the Dempseys demanded, and the strain of it was written across her face. As I drifted through the room, I overheard a cluster of relatives dissecting my family like a case study. Our background labeled modest, Nora described as trying her best to rise above it, and me cast as the inevitable disappointment every family eventually produced. Their confidence came from ignorance. They believed their judgments were safe because the person they mocked couldn't possibly be listening. Back near the technical booth, I noticed the lighting cues programmed a glitch at exactly 8:32 p.m. Moments later, I found the scheduled audio file timed to interrupt the toast at 8:34. Both actions were too precise to be accidental. Someone had engineered a spectacle, one intended to humiliate. Digging deeper through the resort's secured archive, I uncovered litigation records, restructuring logs, and employee termination lists tied to Dempsey Industrial. In the middle of all those names was my father's. The decision that derailed his career and sent my family into years of instability had come from the very people Nora was preparing to marry into. They'd already broken my family once, and if left unchecked, they would do it again. This was no longer just a matter of protecting Nora tonight. It was about refusing to let history repeat itself. The evening unfolded like a polished performance, but I was the only one who knew the script had been rewritten. Using the guise of a technical check, I slipped into the quieter corners of the resort where truth tends to hide. Behind a cracked conference room door, I overheard the groom's mother telling her attorney that if Nora couldn't bring financial value, Owen needed to sever ties before their reputation suffered. She spoke of my sister as if she were inventory, not a human being. In the control booth, the technician who'd been bribed earlier admitted they had paid him to trigger the doctored audio and blame it on equipment failure. When I asked who they were, he glanced toward the ballroom. No words needed. I opened the audio files. Ward Truth MP, three beside an old voicemail from Nora. The cuts were obvious once the two played together, misaligned breaths, mismatched pauses, phrases spliced into accusations meant to shatter her image. Then the resort manager approached, Pal, explaining that the Dempsey's payment had bounced. Only the property's top authority could approve the next steps. And although he didn't yet understand who he was talking to, I did. My time in the shadows was over. Minutes later, a corporate alert flashed across my phone. Final sign-off for Dempsey Industrial Acquisition, awaiting Riley Ward. They had spent the night diminishing me, dismissing me, underestimating me, yet the power to save or end their entire legacy rested in my hand. I walked back into the ballroom with a steadiness I didn't quite feel. My heartbeat thudded under my ribs, steady but forceful, like it was keeping time with the unraveling lies in the room. The celebration carried on with practiced elegant servers, gliding between tables, guests laughing a little too loudly, Nora pretending everything was fine. But beneath that glossy surface, cracks were widening. Near the VIP lounge, a sliver of space between the door and the frame revealed the Dempseys huddled together, their voices sharp with urgency. They were desperate to preserve their image. No one must hear about the debt. Keep the event going. Everything will be fixed once Harbor finalizes the deal. Their certainty that Harbor Point's president was someone they could sway might have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. Then one of them wondered whether Harbor Point's president was someone they could manipulate. The matriarch replied with absolute confidence that everyone had a price. I nearly laughed out loud. Some people had spent their entire lives convincing themselves that manipulation was a universal currency. Down the hall, I found Nora gripping a contract like it might burn her palms. It was a prenuptial contribution agreement, an obligation for her to financially support their family business after marriage. Her voice wavered as she insisted they only wanted clarity. She was trying to prove she belonged, terrified of being discarded. For a moment, all I saw was the girl who once cried when she lost a seashell on the beach, convinced it had been her fault. The fear in her eyes now was far more real and far more dangerous. My phone buzzed. The technician wrote that the doctored audio would automatically broadcast at 8:34 p.m., less than an hour away. If the recording played during the toast, it wouldn't just embarrass Nora, it would destroy her place in this family. She was trying so hard to enter. The damage could follow her for years. Meanwhile, the bounced payment rippled through the Dempseys like a shockwave. Their matriarch masked her fury with a brittle smile as she hissed into the phone about emergency loans and temporary fixes. They were sinking fast, and all their efforts to stay afloat were only dragging others down with them. Suddenly, the resort manager strode into the ballroom, scanning the crowd before calling for Ms. Ward. Everyone looked to Nora. Instead, he walked past her and stopped in front of me. He needed the owner's approval before the event could proceed. A heavy silence fell as eyes shifted toward me, confusion twisting into unease. Something fundamental in the room tilted. They didn't know why yet, but they sensed the balance of power had changed. There was no retreat left. If I stayed quiet, Nora would take the full force of a storm meant to sink the Dempseys, not her. I stepped toward the stage and motioned to kill the music. Conversations faltered into confused murmurs. The matriarch demanded to know what I was doing, but I told her she'd have her answers once the room was silent. Slowly, the noise fell away. I lifted the remote, projecting the resort's technical interface onto the massive screen. Guests gasped as they recognized controls no ordinary person should access. Someone asked how I had owner-level clearance. I answered evenly because I was the owner. I played the manipulated audio, letting their lies echo through the room. Then I paired it with the untouched voicemail, revealing every manufactured splice, the mismatched breaths, awkward transition, distorted tones. Nora broke into sobs as faces turned toward the Dempseys, their expressions morphing from shock into outrage. Next, I displayed the financial truth: overwhelming debt, overdue mortgages, lawsuits, termination logs. and the acquisition contract waiting for only one signature. A whisper cut through the silence. Their empire is collapsing. Finally, I stepped forward and spoke the words that dropped the entire ballroom into stunned quiet. I am Riley Ward, president of Harbor Point Holdings. Nora's voice cracked as she tried to speak. Owen froze beside her, and the woman who had orchestrated everything stumbled back like she'd been struck. I told them I was the person they thought they could manipulate, the leverage they believed they could exploit through my sister. And for the first time that night, everyone finally saw the truth for what it was. The ballroom froze the instant I stepped into the center. The hush was so sudden it felt physical. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stated the truth. I am the president of Harbor Point Holdings. The shock that rippled through the room was almost audible. People who had brushed past me hours earlier now stared as if the floor had shifted beneath them. I hadn't changed. I had just stopped allowing them to define me. I lifted the remote and the first video filled the screen. The groom's mother slipping cash to a technician. Then the footage of her ordering the lighting sabotage. Gasps spread like wildfire as I played the doctored audio beside the original, exposing every splice meant to destroy Nora. Next came the financial records. The debts, the overdue mortgages, the bankruptcy projections, the acquisition contract they were counting on, even the evaluation of my family as if we were assets to be measured. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Then I revealed the document tying one of their past restructuring decisions to the collapse of my own family. Nora trembled. Owen looked gutted. I met his eyes. My sister deserves someone who stands for her. Do you? His voice cracked as he chose Nora. And I realized I didn't need revenge, only truth. The moment the lights dimmed and the screen went dark, the Dempseys seemed to shrink inside the very room they had dominated all evening. Their matriarch tried to rally, her voice trembling as she insisted I would regret exposing them, that I was tarnishing their reputation. I answered with steady composure, reminding her that every document shown came from public records or lawful internal files. She could pursue legal action if she wished, though her debt reports alone could fill an entire courtroom. Around us, the shift was immediate. Guests who once sought their approval now avoided their eyes, unwilling to tether themselves to a sinking ship. I offered the family two choices. They could leave quietly and allow the night to end without further consequences, or they could challenge me and watch every piece of evidence. Sabotage, manipulation, financial misconduct, reach my attorneys and the authorities. The matriarch paused. Her silence said what her pride could not. They had lost. Within minutes, the Dempseys gathered their things and slipped out of the ballroom, their exit stripped of all the grandeur they once demanded. Owen stayed behind. His eyes weren't defensive or angry, just devastated. He stepped toward Nora, admitting he wanted to rebuild a future based on honesty, not expectation or pressure. His apology wasn't polished, but it was sincere, and sincerity was something this night had lacked entirely. Then Nora turned to me. Her voice broke as she confessed how hard she'd tried to earn the Dempseys' approval, how badly she'd wanted to prove she belonged, and how that desire had blinded her to the person who had always stood with her. When she collapsed into my arms, it felt like the first real moment between us in years. I looked at both of them and spoke plainly. If they wanted to move forward, they needed to start from zero. Not with shortcuts or borrowed status, but with work. Harbor Point had opportunities, but only for those willing to earn them. They both agreed. A week later, the morning air carried a sharp chill. Fog rolled in from the ocean, softening the edges of the newly renovated Harbor Point branch perched on the hill. I stood in the parking lot, watching Nora take slow, steady breaths before walking toward the building for her first day of work. She didn't head for the polished front entrance where clients and executives entered. She turned toward the employee door, the one tucked to the side. Simple, unadorned, honest, the same door I had been directed toward when I first returned home. A moment meant to belittle me. Now it carried a different meaning entirely. For Nora, it wasn't humiliation. It was a beginning built on her own effort rather than borrowed prestige. Owen walked beside her, carrying a slim folder with his application materials. He had asked for a chance in the finance department, and I told him he'd have to earn it the same way everyone else did, through a real interview. No promises, no shortcuts. He didn't argue. He just nodded, grateful for the opportunity to start with clean hands. As I watched them step inside, something settled in me, something quiet, steady, and long overdue. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge fulfilled. It was the relief of finally seeing my family choose truth over illusion, work over pretense, and dignity over approval. The loop had closed, the lies had been exposed. The fractures between us had begun to heal, and a future not guaranteed but earned waited on the other side of that unremarkable door. I turned toward the coastline, letting the wind pull through my hair, carrying away the remnants of the weight I had carried for years. I didn't need recognition or applause. I only needed to wield my power with purpose.